Tonight we have the lovely couple from Float in the Forest joining us, Will and Sherri. I'm really excited to have them on. We go back, quite a number of years now. And very sweet and very bright couple. Been successful in starting and running their business, and also have a really cool vision for their business. And I'll be excited to talk about that, as well as some differences about running the Float Center between, the U.S. and in Europe, and specifically in the U.K. So should be a really fun, interesting episode for you. And before we get started, Helmbot has another update that's pretty cool. When you're creating a gift card series, you type in all the information, make all the edits and whatnot, but how cool would it be if you could just duplicate one and then make any changes you wanted? That's what you can do now with their latest update. Is when you create a gift card, you can just grab all the information from a previous series, and then if you want, make some alterations to it. Maybe type Father's Day instead of Mother's Day. Whatever changes right for you. Helmbot.com is where you want to go to check them out, schedule a tour, and make sure it's a good fit for you. Big shout out to Isopod as well. We actually end up talking about Isopod at the very last minute of this episode. They have isopods at their float center, started with 2, and of course they got a 3rd because the isopods are a great, brilliant float tank. I'll let them talk about that a little bit more, but yeah, we believe in our isopods at the float shop. i-sopod.com is where you want to go, and let's go ahead and meet Will and Sherri. Welcome back to another episode of Art of the Float, where float centers thrive. My name is Dylan, and I own the float shop in Portland, Oregon, and I'm the only one in the United States on this podcast here. All my co-hosts weren't able to make it this evening, regretfully for them, because we have some really special guests on this evening. We have Sherri and Will from Float in the Forest, and it's a joy to see you guys again. Thanks so much for being here on the podcast, and it's just good to see your faces.
Thank you for having us.
It was great to be here, Dylan. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I was saying beforehand, you guys look great. I was saying that the shop must be doing wonderful and life must be easy, but then you told me you've been on vacation. So
the timing was quite good. We've had a nice little break.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Did you need one? Is that what? Or
yeah,
I
think
in the schedule, and you guys take care of yourselves.
Well, no, this was a rare occasion. We closed the centre for a week, which was
that's right.
Yeah, that was a real rare thing for us, wasn't it? It was generally needed. I'd say it wasn't sort of desperate that occasion, but yeah, it was generally needed.
We're a sort of a place where it was possible to take a pause like that between kind of the previous big project and the next big project. So it was like kind of now or never, really.
Yeah.
So,
is that right? Well, may I inquire?
Well, not never. Well, we just installed a 3rd float pod early part of this year, so we've been getting to grips with that, and I think needed a break in terms of triple changeovers. And just about to take on our first staff member.
Oh, yay! Congratulations! Yeah. Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. Let's rewind a little bit here and give some setup. Can you guys talk about where you're located, how you got started, and we'll go from there?
So we're located in the Forest of Dean, which is in the UK. We are just about in England, but very close to the border with Wales, in case that helps people. It's a beautiful area. It's quite a tourist destination. It is quite rural, but we have people who travel from about an hour's drive, so surrounding towns and cities as well. I think you should talk about how we came to be.
Wow, that's an epic subject.
Nice.
I guess it goes back to sort of late 90s. We were both students in London, and I had kind of this local bookshop which I'd go into, second-hand bookshop, and I'd kind of gather books and winnow them down to my budget, and find all these obscure and esoteric subjects which I was fascinated by at the time. And I found a John Lilly book, and it was Centre of the Cyclone, and it was like, that one's a keeper straight away kind of thing.
Nice.
And so I was reading about it from this book, and kind of fascinated by the idea of flotation, having never done it. And I was kind of raving about the prospect to everyone who would listen. And I was at this how one night, and kind of bending people's ear about this and saying, have you heard of this thing? Do you know where there is one? How can we do this? And so I came out of that party in the small hours and discovered that on the opposite side of the road was Floatworks, which was
way.
So that was one of those kind of like hairs on the back of the neck go up kind of
wonderful kismet. That's great.
Yeah. So that was kind of the beginning of a long and somewhat disjointed journey.
Did you walk across the street and float right then?
No, because it was like 3 a.m. So I don't think they were open, but I did call them the next day and schedule straight away. So.
Awesome, I love it. Great. And then from there, how did you decide to open a center and share it with your community, especially as a couple?
Well, a lot has happened since then. I mean, we were students and wouldn't have dreamt of it back in those days. We had our own ideas and careers, not that they were particularly linear, but our own things that we went and did. But the idea came to you kind of gradually, didn't it?
Yeah, well, in the pod originally, floating. So, it was one of those times where I wasn't particularly enjoying what I was doing with my life, and I was floating, and the possibility arose. So that was probably about early 2000s, 2005 maybe, somewhere around then. And it was, kind of dismissed after the float as like kind of a lovely idea, but not something that was a practical possibility, But then that came back round maybe a decade or so later as a possibility of something that might actually be a viable option. But again, it was kind of like too steep a road to climb, it seemed at the time, until I then was doing some body work with this guy who it emerged was living on the land next to where Lee and Glenn Perry had the Samedy business. So that was another kind of nudge.
Right, yeah.
So we were lucky enough to go over and spend some time with them for a while. And that was a catalyst, really.
I think we had decided by that point that we wanted to do it. I was mainly working for charities in small, sort of concise contracts, and my contract came to an end, and we'd started talking about it, and we thought, now's the time, let's just seize it. If we don't try, we'll never know. Let's go on this adventure. So that was end of 2016, and we had this opportunity to go and meet Lee and Glenn. So that was when the idea was just sort of forming, really. So we were able to go and spend some time with them, which was amazing and inspiring. Yeah,
beautiful, nice.
Yeah. So and so we'd sorry.
Oh no, you go ahead. I was
going to say we'd already been living in the Forest of Dean for 5 years at that point. So we'd gone from London and lived in other places in between, but our life in London as young students was hectic and fun, whereas here we're in this sort of chilled out space, and we thought, people could emerge from their float into the forest, into nature, a peaceful environment. That thing about having your senses enhanced and being able to go into the trees and notice the sights and the sounds and the smells of the forest in that enhanced state. That was part of the inspiration, really.
Yeah, so we consulted together, and that's exactly what you described to me. That vision was it. And you guys were confident that people would come. Like, this is something that, based on the location, you're always looking at how many people, the population, how many people are going to be wanting to visit your center. You just weigh the different factors, and you guys were confident that this was a good location. And I'd love to know, of course I want to ask about business, but I want to hear about that vision part. Are people staying and experiencing nature there, or do they pop in, pop out?
Not so much.
Oh.
Yeah, they don't tend to go for walks among the trees. Occasionally. I think they appreciate when they come out of the centre that the area around is generally pretty quiet. I think they appreciate that. And we quite often point people to go off to other areas around the forest, and they're quite often, and they're quite often visiting the area. You know, we get a lot of tourists, so they're coming for a relaxed break, and sort of combine us in with that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the vision, but not necessarily the sort of main reason for people coming.
Sure.
I think it's one of those things where it's not necessarily a deliberate, planned element of the overall experience for the person who's coming, particularly not the first occasion.
Sure.
But I think it's one of those kind of set and setting, subtle conditioners, you know?
Unconscious. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, I can only imagine. That'd be so beautiful to float at your center. Absolutely. I mean, we're downtown. Like, your only option is to walk right out into traffic, you know? And we have forests nearby. You can get there, but that's such a conscious choice as to just feeling nature wash over you as soon as you get out of a float. That sounds like magic to me. You guys had a pretty big build-out. Yours was, I would say, unusually epic. Could you share a little bit about your experience? I mean, everybody has build-out experiences, but...
Well, I'll mostly let Will talk about that, but I was just going to say, I think you know, we had a difficult search. We looked over a period of a year and a half at 16 different venues. And that is in detail, not just looking online. We went to visit these places. We drew out potential layouts. We looked into all sorts of different aspects of them. And so it was like a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster of a journey.
Sure.
And the place that we found was actually, I think, number 14 out of 16. So we went on to look at a couple of other places before we came back to this one, because it was, I had complete reservations about it because it was so huge and just an empty space. And I said, how on earth can we heat that? What are we going to do with that space? So I was really reluctant at first, but he had the vision. So I'll let you talk about that.
Well, it was, I mean, the same factor was also a benefit in that it was a very clean slate. So I think we dodged a lot of bullets that other more established venues may have fired our way. So, you know, things like adapting existing spaces, if you're pulling stuff out, you never quite know what you might discover. Whereas the nice thing here was that you'd walk in and it was an industrial unit, so it's about 9 metres high at the highest point, about 180 square metres, kind of rectangular space, quite a nice industrial unit. It's got stone cladding on the outside, which is kind of in keeping with the outside sort of forest vibe. It's very well built. It was originally built with some public money that was part of a rural development program. So everything was quite well specified. There wasn't corners cut in terms of cost for the original structure.
Yeah.
So, but as you say, Dylan, even with a beautiful clean slate, there was, you know, challenges. Like we couldn't cut the concrete floor, so that meant all sorts of implications for drainage in terms of build out. We originally decided to overcome some of those by using a pump. With hindsight, not the wisest of choices.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah. So, so there was one kind of pre-existing kind of waste pipe that was already into the concrete and went out underneath the foundations. So the plan was to use that as the lowest point, but the regulations in terms of fall, as in the angle of drainage pipes, meant that we had to not only have steps up, so that the actual finished floor level of the float rooms had to be about 250 millimeters, about a foot higher
Wow.
than the concrete, in order to gain the falls. But even then, that wasn't quite enough.
And we're limited by how much we could raise it up because of access and, you know, the maximum depth that you can have a step
Sure.
into the room.
So,
Wow.
so for example, so you, for accessibility, there's regulations about the ratio of slope that you can have. So you have to have a maximum incline of 1 in 12. So there's gradually all these constraints, primarily driven by the regulations, were superimposed on the space, which seemed like this huge open sphere of possibilities, but actually was quite constrained by these kind of limitations. But to come back to your question about the pump, so we had to. So the solution, again, I didn't want to put holes through the walls because part of the constraints of the lease were to have any cost of reversion in the future, because we're leasing the space. Any cost of reversion would fall on us. So one of the consequences of that was minimising kind of changes to the fabric of the building, including penetrations through the walls.
Sure.
So rather than put holes through the walls and then use the greater drop, because the floor level internally was higher than the floor level externally in some places. So if we'd have chosen at the beginning to put penetrations through the walls, it would have been very simple, because we could take advantage of that additional drop external to the building to have the requisite falls. But the choice was made basically by me. So I have to put my hand up to that one, to use a pump in order to avoid putting penetrations through the wall.
I'm sure Sherri never brings that up. Never.
I actually don't. I pretty much defer to him with the construction. I mean, of what he managed to plan and achieve, really.
You're very kind.
But yeah, we did have a stressful first day of beta testers. We planned a fully booked day of beta testers, and the floors were flooding.
Yeah. Long story short, is
nightmare.
The pump that I chose after great research was not appropriate to the job. But by then it was too late. Everything was under the floors. We couldn't rip up the floors, so we had to put penetration through the external wall in the end anyway.
Oh my god! Wow.
We could have saved up. It's one of those hindsight things.
Of course. Oh my lord! So I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. What was the resolution, and why did you just run piping through the walls to the existing drainage?
Yeah, so there's a slight incline in the ground level across the length of the building externally. So that meant that we were able to put holes through the walls at the level where the pump was, which was basically sat on the concrete plinth of the foundation. Okay. So we were able to take a pipe through the external wall at that point, and on the outside there was still then additional fall to be able to take a pipe and run down the side of the building and then come into the external sewer at the front.
Okay. So simple the whole time. It was wow. You guys. You guys just had some challenges. I don't even think I knew about that one, to be honest.
No.
Like, my gosh. You guys had really clear visions on the design of your building, the inside, and how you wanted it to look and feel. Do you feel like you hit the mark? Do you feel in retrospect like you made the right choices?
I think we had some crazy ideas at the beginning, and we actually we took on a guy, he's a surveyor, isn't he, who kind of reeled us in a little bit and said, you can't do that, and what are you thinking? And
what were some of the crazier ideas?
You had a vision of an octagonal room, didn't you? An octagonal lounge.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I mean,
would have been
cool.
very cool, but very complicated.
Sure.
And then there were certain things that he was very knowledgeable on, fire regulations and stuff, like you couldn't have rooms that just came off other rooms, that you'd have to go through several rooms before you got to the outside. He sort of reeled us in on those. So I think he simplified the design a bit, didn't he? And told us what we could do and couldn't do. And we simplified it a bit as well. We did have this vision of lovely sails on the ceiling in the lounge, didn't we? That never quite happened.
Well, it's a very kind of iterative process, I guess it always is for everyone, as you kind of you discover layers of constraint which can actually be clarifying, because when your creativity is constrained, it's kind of can be more fruitful in a way, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Some of the best music is made that way, right? Give them a blank check, and it's like, you need some limits here to produce. Yeah. So, how is business? I mean, COVID and everything just throws in such a wild swing into things, but it sounds like people are getting out there, and even if they're not taking an hour-long walk through the forest afterwards, it is working as a tourist location, and people are popping in or travel.
Yeah, well, we can come back to COVID if you like, but we had been open for just over a year when COVID came along, which was actually not bad. If it had been earlier than that, I think that would have been a lot worse. And so I think some other people who opened after us suffered more. Okay. But no, it's been good. We have a good balance of people who come from different locations. So the immediate area in the Forest of Dean, we have some people come, and it's probably taking longer to reach those people and tell them about us than it is people further afield. So then we have people who travel, like I say, about up to an hour from surrounding towns and cities. And then we have the tourists who are more seasonal, but also great at being last-minute bookings. So a lot of people sort of go away and don't think about what they're going to do until they get there.
Totally.
And last summer, well, actually the last 2 summers, we were having to turn them away because we were fully booked.
Wow. Awesome.
Which was both amazing and painful. Whereas now we've got the third. Now we've got the third pod. We have extra capacity, and so we're finding those last-minute bookings. So it's good. Yeah, we've just had the third pod for 2-3 months.
Yeah.
So we're still finding our feet with it, but the weekends are getting booked up, and getting there gradually with the weekdays as well.
Congratulations. So, That's wonderful. Enough to the point, apparently, to be able to bring on an employee.
Yes. Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I think in the original vision, we thought we would get an employee about 9 months in, and it's been 3 and a bit years, but that's probably always the way. Excited about getting someone to help us now. Yeah.
It seems like the next step of the adventure, and one which has a whole new kind of opens a whole new set of challenges. It's kind of like feels sometimes like kind of running a small business, particularly a float business. It's like a continuous initiation. There's
how do I document this and pass this on to somebody? Because every day is different. Is that somewhere around what you're describing?
yeah. But also, the learning curve for us is constantly ongoing. But that makes it exciting, doesn't it? It's an adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful thing. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Awesome. Moving on a little bit here, I'm curious if we can talk about some of the differences. I mean, I feel like a lot of the float community discussion is in the United States. The float conference occurs in the United States. I'm curious, what have you found maybe is a little bit different across the pond, whether maybe it's with your demographics or apparently opening your building. I mean, you have different regulations, of course, and we have some of that, between states for sure. But are there any differences that come to mind? That you can think of?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the float
call out to you? Especially what I would love is for people, again, across the pond to be able to hear this and hear these differences and know that they are heard and seen.
Yeah, so I'll let Will come up with some of his ideas, but in a minute. Yeah, I think the one that strikes me is that sales, I think, is quite different here in the UK.
Okay.
So we have to be kind of careful, I guess, not to come across pushy. Mm-hmm. I think the UK sensibilities, people get turned off if they think that you're pushing something on them. And so, yeah, we don't tend to... Well, it's also personally our choice. We don't tend to sell to people when they come out of their float. Mm-hmm. For us, that would be kind of uncomfortable, I think, personally, but it is also a cultural thing. So we do follow up with people with emails afterwards. Mm-hmm. But yeah, from a lot of what we hear, that would be kind of crazy, I think. Maybe in America, I don't know. If someone was walking out their floats, just let them walk out the door and not try and upsell them or whatever. Well, I think that is quite different.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who started out very much, I feel like how you guys are currently, I've had to wind myself up more to be able to let them know, like, oh, you had a great experience, and talk about that. And also, just so you know, we have this available, is something that I'm kind of constantly pushing against. And then, because I have that reticence, yeah, our employees can, I guess, kind of miss that as well. So I might be in the other room and hear that nobody was told about a starter pack, whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's a thing. Whereas I think that's exactly what you're describing, the difference. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So, what do you think? I've put him on the spot now.
There's differences in terms of regulation as well, I guess. In that there's local authorities and they have their constraints, and there's sort of national legislation, but really there's hitherto been nothing of the sort of similar scale to the things that you've described on the podcast and in previous episodes in terms of local health authority strictures and constraints that are imposed. It seems kind of a bit more open in the UK as far as regulation goes, specifically about the float itself, putting aside anything in terms of the planning and the building control and all that. I think that's probably on a par.
That's regulated, yeah.
In terms of the constraints, but generally there's not really any direct legislation in the UK that regulates floating in the same way that it sounds like in some states, at least in the US. The pool kind of regulations seem to grab hold of the float, not necessarily appropriately or to its benefit. So I think that's quite a difference. So we were, that's definitely makes things easier. Although sometimes, again, having some constraints can be useful, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. It makes it slightly subject to risk of those who might not inform themselves as well as you might like, and therefore might risk bringing the float in a broader sense into disrepute. So, it's a double-edged sword there.
Absolutely. Yep. I feel the same way. You had earlier talked about another float center that had opened just before COVID, and it sounds like that was difficult for them. Mm. I'm not going to have you speak for all of Europe, but if you would, no,
it is a big area.
but I am curious about like the numbers of float centers, and if it feels like there are. If it's exciting for people to open a float center right now, or if it's kind of like there's a very mild energy about it, and maybe somebody will just pop up and want to open one occasionally, or just what the feeling is over there.
I think we were in a little wave of float centres at the time. We opened in 2019, and there were a few that opened around that time. And there have been, I think there's been another little wave again recently, hasn't there? Probably post-COVID, if you can say that, or since the restrictions anyway. So yeah, I think it probably is quite an exciting time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. There's certainly, I think it's probably getting on for between 70 and 80 float centres in the UK at least now.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which is quite a substantial increase, say, on 5 years ago. So there's definitely, the curve that you can view in the wonderful state of the industry reports that have been put together is kind of, I guess we're a couple of years, maybe 3 years or something behind that curve that occurred in the US. So we're at that part of that hockey stick, I think, that's still curving upwards.
Well, centres have closed as well, probably like everywhere.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it is still growing. Yeah.
We'll include a link to the Float Tank Solutions industry report, which is a super cool packet of information. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. That's a much larger number than I anticipated, to be honest, that I would have guessed. Part of me is, what our goal is to provide a resource for float centers out there who are starting and running, and those who want to grow. And where are people finding resources over there? What can we do to better provide resources?
Well, we always point people to your podcast because we listened to pretty much the whole back catalogue before we opened. So we know your whole story.
Great, I don't need to say anything.
But yeah, no, we always point people to the Float and also Float Tank Solutions. So I think a lot of the resources are very applicable. There'll be some things that vary, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's some things that are very much universal, and those are, business-related things. As you mentioned earlier, the idea of keeping an eye on what your catchment area has in terms of size of population and demographic, and those kind of things are pretty universal, I think.
Yeah.
With the caveat that Sherri mentioned earlier, that I think the nature of sales in the UK is a somewhat different beast in terms of tone. But again, there's other things which are very much common as well in terms of the physicality of actually running a centre, or water chemistry things. I think there's very much more.
The water's not too different over there.
Well, it varies, but then probably like over there. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
in terms of the water composition.
But we do get people quite regularly, coming to us saying we came to float with you and we'd love to set up a centre, which is nice. It's great, and we have this is a balance, isn't it? Between providing time and free resource when you have your resource constrained yourself versus wanting to nurture that kind of urge to spread the good word kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, as Sherri says, we have kind of a standard response now, which kind of says, lots to learn, read this and read that, and then come back to us with questions.
Yeah.
Nice, cool, great.
But I will say that within the 70
please.
to 80, that includes a wide variety, a lot of which will be maybe a float tank tagged onto a gym or a hairdresser's or a beauty salon or whatever, not necessarily a full-blown focused float centre. Yeah.
Beauty salons with float tanks? Cool, that's great.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Seems like it is interesting. That always raises a little yellow flag to me of, do they understand the water chemistry? Are they doing a proper job of maintenance, all that? But it also makes me feel like floating is more ubiquitous over there. People are more comfortable jumping into a float tank. I don't know necessarily.
Still a lot of education. We've been educating constantly and still are, and we still get people who have never heard of it, and and what is it, and so it's fun. That's ongoing.
But having said that, I think it is there's been that penetration into popular culture to a certain extent now, which means that, I don't know, if certainly people who we interact with, which is probably not a representative sample, but people who we interact with do tend to more often than not have at least heard of it, even if they have misconceptions.
Yeah, when I first started, because I did all the networking and going out and talking to people, when I first started, maybe, I don't know, a quarter of the people in the room might have heard of it, if you're lucky. But now it tends to be probably more than half, I think, because I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar with our arc. Like, just I feel like it was 10% of people back in the day here in Portland, and now it's rare somebody hasn't heard of floating in some capacity, like some general idea of it out here.
Yeah.
You guys have a little bit of a stage here. Is there anything you'd like to leave other entrepreneurs, floatrepreneurs out there who maybe are thinking about starting, or maybe who are running, and you could give a little advice for tune-up, but particularly the people just starting out? I'd be really curious if there's anything you'd like to pass on, particularly, again, like in Europe and the UK, but not even necessarily that. This is your chance. This is your moment.
Well, there's probably several things, but one thing I would say is connect with other float centre owners.
Awesome.
Reach out, make connections, and make friends, really. It's good to talk about stuff. It's good to share experiences and not feel alone. So yeah, we don't know everybody in all the centres in the UK, but we have got a few connections, and yeah, they're really valuable. We've got a lot to learn from each other.
Love it.
Yeah.
Have you been able to maintain that through COVID?
Yeah. Before we opened, we went to visit a few centres, and people were really supportive and really helpful and sweet. And yeah, those are connections that we've carried on. And yeah, it's quite a nice little sort of supportive community, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'd encourage people to engage with that, not to feel worried that people won't want you to open or anything like that. We'd far rather have a conversation and yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And
what were you going to say, Will?
I think, a broader kind of approach to take, as well as the engaging with your kind of fellow floatrepreneurs, is sort of the attitude that you bring, or the motivation, or the stance you take in entering into the business. Because I think I don't know if this is particularly true of flotation, because I haven't run many other businesses, but I've got a feeling it might be particularly true of flotation, but that it offers, running the float business offers a real wealth of opportunity for sort of self-discovery through service to others, a kind of process of, like I said before, of kind of continuous initiation. There's so many opportunities for kind of to use the situation not only to benefit others, but also in doing so, in serving others, to benefit yourself and to develop yourself. And
love it.
And I think, I get the feeling that flotation offers a greater wealth of opportunity in that regard, in all sorts of ways, than perhaps other businesses do. So I think if you approach the business with that kind of a stance, the more mundane aspects of success purely on a business level, or in terms of doing things well practically, that can all kind of follow as a result by taking that kind of approach. So I'd encourage people to enter into the enterprise or the adventure of opening a float centre in that spirit, because I think it can only benefit themselves and the people around them.
Beautiful. Yes. Let's go out on that note. Great. I love it. I love what you're talking about being in service of others, and I feel like working at a float center is a wonderful opportunity to just practice presence and connection with people as they come in, and I think you're preaching it. So thank you. Thank you guys for joining this evening. Oh, speaking of evening, what time is it where you guys are at?
2:00 in the morning.
2:00 in the morning. Thank you for staying up so late and joining me. I did not start early or anything. Thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys staying up and chatting and getting to hear more of your story. Thank you guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I want to give a few thanks before we close out. In addition to Sherri and Will, I also want to thank you for listening to this pod. Thank you so much for joining us this evening or very early morning, whenever you're listening to this. And thanks for all the other things. Supporting us on Patreon means a ton. Checking out shop.artofthefloat.com. And thanks for supporting our sponsors, of course, Helmbot and Isopod. Thank you very much for supporting us. Thanks for supporting them. We got some thumbs up on Isopod. Nice.
We love Isopod. We have Isopods.
Is it all 3 Isopods?
Yes.
Oh, super cool. Yay. Great. They are such beasts. I love them so much.
Yeah.
Do you also get the like, oh my gosh, it's just like, as they walk in and they see the float tanks, like, oh my gosh, okay, the ceiling isn't right here. This is a safe place. Oh, I love that.
It's
Great.
a combination of, it's so much bigger than I thought it would be, and it looks so cool.
Yeah, right?
You know,
Nice.
it's like some kind of friendly creature as well, the shape of them.
Like a smiling whale or something.
Yeah, we have found if you put giant googly eyes on your float tanks, they get very amphibious.
Great
looking,
idea.
yeah.
To steal that.
You really should. You can anthropomorphize them very easily. Let's see here. Do I have any other thanks? To my co-host In Spirit for being here. I'm sorry they weren't able to make it tonight. And to Olga for producing the show, making sure we got our guests on even at a really late hour. And I think that's it. Thank you. And as always, remember to find out if you can cut into the flooring before you sign that lease. I'm just teasing. Have a great one. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.